qualify as low income. So put these two pieces together, and we've got a rather scary challenge in front of us, because the next generation of students who will be populating our institutions will be predominantly the type of students that we haven't found a way to succeed with as a nation. It's a good introduction to my home campus, Georgia State University. This is not just a pretty picture of the Atlanta skyline. That white building on the right is our largest academic building. Our business school, law school, classroom buildings are all in that picture. We're mixed into the general fabric of downtown Atlanta. And you know, for much of our history, we've been kind of a sleepy commuter school in downtown Atlanta. We are not the University of Georgia, the big football powerhouse located in Athens. We're also not Georgia Tech, one of the most elite public institutions in the country, only about a mile away from us in the downtown area of Atlanta. In fact, if there's any claim to fame to Georgia State historically, it may be our geography. We have the uncommon, maybe it's even unique distinction of having a National Park Service historic district bisect our campus in half. The Auburn Avenue district celebrates the life and the work of the Reverend Martin Luther King. And the office I work in every morning is literally 4 blocks away from that red brick building you see at the bottom of the screen. That's Ebenezer Baptist Church, where the Reverend King and his father before him were both head pastors. You walk up the street a little further than that, you get to his gravesite. A little further than that, the mustard-colored house is his childhood home. So we're living and working every day at Georgia State on this turf that is kind of infused with historical significance. But for much of our history, Georgia State did not live up to that legacy. We were segregated well into the 1960s. Sad irony there that the campus closest to where the Nobel Prize winning Reverend King was living and working was itself very much part of the problem. But even much more recently, we were grossly underserving our students of color. These were our so-called success rates as of a little over a decade ago. Overall, our graduation rates hovered around 30%, and we were a poster child for achievement gaps. Year after year, semester after semester, you could bank on the fact that the white students would outperform the Latino and the African American students, the middle and upper income students would outperform the low income students. That's just the way it was. And one of the things that makes Georgia State's story hopefully helpful for your context, maybe a little bit inspirational, is what's happened in the decades since these numbers were locked in would not suggest that Georgia State would be the site of a turnaround. For one thing, we were going through significant demographic changes, as I know a number of your institutions are as well. As I said, when I arrived at Georgia State as a faculty member 25 plus years ago, it was a 65% white institution. And what's happened over the time period is Georgia State, in the middle of downtown Atlanta, has been at the leading edge of demographic changes that are certainly characterizing Georgia and perhaps your state as well. And every year we get more and more diverse, to the point now where this past fall we were 67% non-white. We have no majority population. The largest single group are African American students, about 39%. Our 2 fastest growing groups are our Latino students and our Asian American students. The other demographic change that had gone on over the last decade or so is by far the more challenging of the two when it comes to student success numbers. Our students became a lot less well-resourced financially over this time period. The recession hit Atlanta very hard. We were a boom city before the recession. When the recession hit, at one point, among all American urban centers, we had the highest unemployment rate and the highest default rate. And those sorts of negative economic trends did not hit the population equitably, right? The sons and daughters of Georgia Tech and Emory were not impacted in the same way as the families that enroll their children, their students at Georgia State. These are the individuals who are losing their homes and losing their jobs and so forth. So over a 5-year period, we basically doubled the number of low-income students, Pell students, we enroll at Georgia State. And we moved from an institution that had under a third of its students qualify for Pell Grants, low-income students, to now, as you can see, almost 60%. The average Pell family in America last year came from an annual household income of about $25,000 a year. So all of these students are the students that basically American higher education has been failing. They're the students in that bottom band of the New York Times chart we were looking at just a minute ago. And increasingly, this became our norm. right? This was not, let's build a program to serve these students. These are our students. 80% of the undergraduates enroll at Georgia State fall into some federal at-risk category. They're either low income, they're first generation, or they're underrepresented minorities. And the majority are in more than one of those categories. And the scale became immense. This fall and spring at Georgia State, we've enrolled about 26,000 Pell students. To put that in some kind of perspective, the entire Ivy League combined enrolled this past academic year about 9,800 Pell students. So Georgia State alone is enrolling almost 3 times the number of low-income students as the entire Ivy League. It's not going to be business as usual, right? When you go through these kind of demographic shifts, you can't sit back and say what we've been doing for the last 20 years or 30 years or 40 years is going to suffice. We're going to have to make some changes. And just to clarify this 10-year trend, we have not been becoming more selective in our admissions. Here's a rare moment, a vice president in charge of enrollment at an institution standing up and bragging about the fact that over the last 10 years, our SAT scores went down by 33 points. But that's a reality. That's a reality of public education in Georgia. It's a reality of the students we're serving at Georgia State. And it's not something we feel we need to be ashamed or embarrassed about. These are the students who need our help and support. And we have broadened our admissions criteria over this time period, even as we've tried to raise graduation rates. One other detail is we're not doing it with more resources either. So as I said, the recession hit Georgia very hard. That meant tax rolls went down. In a 5-year period, we lost $40 million in state appropriations. Most of these funds have not come back to the university. And I say none of this to be to elicit sympathy, because many of you have gone through the same sort of demographic shifts and some of the same kind of budget pressures. But to say that what has happened at Georgia State did not happen because the stars aligned, right? It wasn't that we waited for the moment where everything was right and our state legislature came in and gave us tens of millions of additional dollars, and our K-12 system finally got serious about math education and produced much better prepared students. No. What we did about 10 years ago is really begin to take a long, hard look at ourselves. We put a mirror to ourselves. We actually invested in data and data teams, even as we were losing state appropriations, to see how are we complicit in the fact that at the time, 7 out of 10 students who came to Georgia State were leaving with debt and absolutely nothing to show for it. And we began to publicly pose a question that I must confess was very uncomfortable at the time. Are we the problem? What is our role in the fact that so many of these students are dropping out? We began to look at the data at our own failings, but we also began to use the data to construct new initiatives, data-based initiatives in many cases, data-informed initiatives, track the outcomes carefully, and scale up those kind of programs that proved most effective. And what's happened over the last decade is we've really changed the student life cycle in a significant way through this ad hoc process initially and then more holistic process of rethinking the student life cycle. So what I'm going to do over the next few minutes is walk you through the kind of pathway students take in engaging and enrolling and hopefully graduating from Georgia State, and talk a little bit about how we saw ourselves as part of the problem and how we've tried to address some of those issues. First example I want to talk about is summer melt. When I'm talking about summer melt, I'm not talking about the phenomena of students who confirm their intent to enroll at your institution and end up going someplace else. I'm talking about something much more insidious than that. It's students who do everything right. They go to high school, they get their diploma, they take their college prep classes, they take the SAT or ACT, they apply to college, they get into college, they confirm they're going to college. In many cases, they even come to campus and sign up for classes, but then they don't show up. They don't show up not only not to Georgia State, they don't show up anywhere across the country. They don't go to college. So in the summer of 2015, this was becoming a growing problem for us. The level of confirmed freshmen who were not showing up for classes in the fall semester grew to about 19%. So we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of students. And we did a data analysis of who these students were and where they ended up. And we used National Student Clearinghouse data to track them for an entire 12-month period. And what we found was really disturbing, that there were almost 300 students who 12 months later hadn't attended a single day of post-secondary work anywhere across the United States. And you're seeing right there the profile of these students. mostly non-white, mostly low income, really good prospects for college. These are not borderline students. They finished high school with 3.3 GPAs, so solid B students, but they're just melting away during the summer just by doing everything right in the years leading up to going to college. So we did an analysis. What was tripping up these students that prevented so many of them from making it across the finish line, at least to get to the first day of classes? And not surprisingly, we found a lot of the problem was us. You know, we were able to catalog 14 different bureaucratic things that students need to do during the summer when, by the way, they don't have access to their high school counselors and they're not yet on campus with us, so they're like many of your online students, that they have to do in the summer to get ready for the first day of classes. Things you're aware of, like completing the FAFSA. No 17-year-old should be expected to do that on his or her own, but other things, like the verification request. I'm not sure how many of you know that whole process, but just like the IRS runs an algorithm to pick out tax returns that look out of the ordinary, and those are much more likely to get audited, so too the federal government uses a verification process, an algorithm, to pick out certain of the FAFSAs to get further analysis. And if you're the son or daughter of a middle-income family and parents file a joint return, very unlikely to be selected for a verification request. But if you're being raised by your grandmother because your biological dad is not in the picture, then bingo, you're much more likely to get selected for a verification request. And what 17-year-old from any background is going to respond constructively to a formal request in the middle of July from the federal government that says, we need written verification that your grandmother is your legal guardian and that your biological father is not contributing to the finances of your family? And what we found, not surprisingly, but sadly, is a subset of students who got those requests were sticking it in their pocket and saying, I guess I'm not going to college after all. State of Georgia requires immunization records of all freshly matriculated students. Now, it makes sense from a public health perspective for students who are living on campus or studying in face-to-face classes. They're going to be in close proximity. But another big differentiator when it comes to economic background, because that middle or upper income student doesn't give the request a second thought. Hands it to mom or dad, the immunization records are sent in, all taken care of. But if you have had spotty health care and being raised by grandma and grandma doesn't know your health history and so forth, it can be another reason why you fail to go to college. So what we did for the summer of 16, the next summer, is just change the way we onboard students. Now, as you're admitted to Georgia State, one of the first things you get after your admissions acknowledgement is a request to take a smartphone survey. On this survey, we ask all the kinds of questions you would never ask on a college application. Do you have a disability? Are you working? How many hours do you work a week? Do you actually contribute to the finances of your family every week in addition to trying to pay for college? Because a large subset of Georgia State students are still supporting the family rent money, food money, childcare money, and so forth. What courses in high school did you love or hate? The idea is from the moment they're admitted to Georgia State, we want to begin an individualized communication flow with the students so that they can feel supported and be identified with in an appropriate fashion. Then we launched a portal. We created a new portal which takes students through those 14 steps I was just describing that students need to complete during the summer before matriculating. But because it's a portal, we can actually track where they are in the process now. It used to be we would know a student was engaged and now they're no longer engaged. Now we know a student was engaged until we asked for their immunization records, and then we didn't hear from them. So we can reach out with specific advice and help in that field. Oh, do you know that our clinic on campus will offer the immunizations 3 days a week in the afternoon and so forth. Finally, and probably most impactfully, we became one of the first universities in the country to launch an AI-enhanced chatbot for student success purposes. What's a chatbot? It's an automatic texting platform. What we did is we built up a knowledge base of almost 2,000 answers to commonly asked questions by incoming freshmen. Questions about financial aid and verification and registration and housing and all the immunizations, all the sorts of things that freshmen may wonder about. And we contracted with a startup out of the Harvard incubator, a company called AdmitHub, to work and put that on a smartphone platform. The AI is actually used when the student texts in a question. The AI goes into the knowledge base of 2,000 answers and picks out the appropriate response. When we launched this platform in summer of 16, just for our incoming first-year students, we thought that we'd have 5,000 or 6,000 questions answered for students over the first 3 months. Over that 3-month period, just for our incoming students, we had over 200,000 questions answered. Average response time was 7 seconds. We had students texting questions in at 3 in the morning. We had individual students who raised 40 and 50 questions in the months leading up to the beginning of classes. And like a lot of our projects, our initiatives, we hired an independent evaluator to do an assessment of this project. I'll show you the quantitative results in a second, but what was perhaps most interesting were the qualitative results. What it was Lindsay Page of the University of Pittsburgh found is that there were students who admitted that they were more likely to ask the chatbot questions than a human being. Why? Because first-generation students often feel embarrassed and out of place because they don't know the answers to things they think everybody else knows. Or, in some cases, these questions had to do with personal business that made the students uncomfortable. If you don't know where your biological dad is, and that's why you can't sign the FAFSA, then you don't necessarily want to go into some stranger's office and spill out your guts to that individual. So the students indicated they recognized this was a tool, and they were more likely to use it because they knew it was an impersonal sort of device. And did it make a difference? It made a big difference from a quantitative perspective as well. In 1 year, just with these changes to the way we onboard Georgia State, all of which, by the way, were quite low cost, altogether in aggregate, under $100,000, we lowered summer melt by 21%. Given the size of our freshman class, that translated to over 300 students who were sitting there on the first day of classes for fall of 2016, who were entirely sitting out the college experience just 12 months earlier. How about getting students off to a good start? We got better and better at looking at analytics. We got better at identifying a subgroup of our students who were almost destined to fail. We began to look and track at what were the prospects of a student being retained given certain profiles. And here I'm not talking about profiling the incoming students by their race, ethnicity, or income level. What we got better at is looking at their academic records. We have a lot of feeder high schools that provide dozens and dozens of students to Georgia State every year. We began to ask questions like, what does a B grade at this high school in a 10th grade science class or math class mean when the student takes freshman year math or science at Georgia State? And we found obviously big discrepancies. A B grade at one high school could mean very different predictions than than the same grade at a different high school. And we got to the point where we could define a subgroup of fully admissible students to Georgia State. So here I'm not talking about remedial students. These are students the state of Georgia has certified as college ready, who only had about a 50% chance of lasting the first year. Half of them would be gone with debt and nothing to show for it. And we had made a commitment not to exclude such students from our admissions pool. So what we started to do about 5 years ago is admit them through a different process. They get a different letter. It says, welcome to Georgia State for the fall. One condition, you have to come for the entire summer beforehand. It's not a remedial semester. In fact, the design of the semester is to expose these students to other students who have already figured out how to do college. So we intentionally enroll these students, sprinkle them in among some of our sophomores and juniors, some of whom are highly motivated because they're back in the summer taking classes and so forth, because we think it's a really important model for students who have come from, in many cases, underserved high schools to see firsthand somebody like themselves doing college well, somebody who's figured out how to do college. But because our enrollment is lower in the summer, we also have more advisors and tutors, and we do learning communities and all the sorts of things we would love to do for every student every semester. These students get in that 7-week term. They're taking 7 hours of bachelor's credit, so they're paying for it not by some big grant from a foundation, but by their regular financial aid. They qualify as enrolled for the minimum hours they need for Pell and other federal aid during the summer. So does this sort of initiative make a difference? Again, a big difference. Students with the exact same academic profile we were retaining at a 50% clip, we're now retaining at an 87% clip. That's almost 200 more students sticking with us through this program. And because the program is now 5 years old, we can see that the 5-year graduation rate for these students now is surpassing what was, before we launched the program, the 1-year retention rate for students with the same profile. Issue that Pam was talking about just a minute ago is, making it possible for students to see the light at the end of the tunnel, why they're enrolled, and what their purpose in getting a college degree really is. And the reality is, as Pam was saying, we overwhelm students with choices. Right? At Georgia State, we brag in the brochure about the fact that we have over 90 undergraduate majors. good from a PR perspective, terrible if you're a student coming in, especially a first-generation student, and we put all these choices in front of our students. And never have we as an institution, and I think it's true of a lot of our peers, thought about this process in a very coordinated fashion. So for years, what we would do is bring our freshmen into orientations in a big room like this, sit them down at tables in groups of 200, 250 at a time, and here was the real magic of what we came up with. We would sit them down and say to them, choose. Pick something. Pick a major, pick 5 or 6 classes. I'm sure it'll all work out. But it didn't work out. We ran the data 6, 7 years ago. The average Georgia State graduate, so these are our success stories, were going through 2.6 majors before they graduated. Not the student's fault, that was our fault. How do you expect a first-generation student to make an informed choice among 90 majors when they have no context to do so? So we've changed the whole process by which we onboard all our students when it comes to academic fields. We've created another portal. It looks like this. Whatever the student has indicated on their application as their academic area of interest, in this case it's a nursing student, we show them live job data from this morning, from the very morning, about the number of jobs listed in the metro Atlanta area in nursing. What's the starting salary if you have a bachelor's degree? What's the starting salary if you have an associate's degree? What's the average time to degree? But like Netflix or Amazon that say, well, you like these books or movies, you might be interested in these others, we say, well, if you're interested in nursing, you may be interested in the fact that we have degrees in health informatics and public health and health management and radiologic technology. I didn't know till I looked at the portal that every morning in Atlanta there are almost as many jobs listed for radiologic technicians as there are for nurses, and the starting salary is comparable. So if I don't know that, then what 17-year-old first enrolling at Georgia State is going to know that? So the idea, they have access to this portal throughout their careers, but the idea is even before they set foot on campus, get them to begin to think about what some of the implications are of the academic choices they're about to make. Then now we enroll all first-year students in learning communities. It's required. It's just what we do at Georgia State. First semester, students are in groups of 25 students, and they take all their courses together, all 5 or 6 classes in groups of 25. They move physically in their classes together. We can't afford to cap sections at 25. In many cases, they're larger courses, but those 25 students will be together, so they do all the heavy lifting, right? They develop the friendships, the partnerships, the study groups, and so forth. And just by that structure, no cost whatsoever, but enrolling the students in a different sort of fashion, we saw a significant increase in first-year GPA, a significant increase in retention rates. But to deal with the problem of students moving between majors, what we started doing now 6 years ago is organizing all these learning communities around meta-majors. We no longer put pressure on our incoming students to pick a major. If they know they want to be an accountant, fine. We'll put them down in Banner as an accountant. But still, they'll be put in the business meta-major along with 24 other students who are interested in business. That way we can assign block scheduling, so they take 5 or 6 classes that are foundational to the meta-major field. But much more importantly, we're able to push programming at them all through the first year. So the for the students in the business meta-majors, the departments will hold open houses. We'll do alumni panels. We'll do a lecture series. We have advisors come into those sessions and work with the students on some of the distinctions. A faculty member from business will teach an orientation course as part of each of the learning communities in business. The idea is by the end of the first year, students should have a fighting chance of making an informed decision about academic major. And it really hasn't cost us anything. In fact, in some ways, it's been administratively more efficient. But has it made a difference as far as student success? Again, another big difference. Within the first 3 years of requiring all of our incoming students to be in these meta-major-based learning communities, we saw over a 30% drop in number of students changing majors after the freshman year. Students were finding the right fit earlier on, as you'll see in a moment, lowering time to degree and completion and raising completion. How about getting students through those tough gateway courses? For us, a terrible barrier to success historically has been introductory math classes. 7, 8 years ago, 43% of the students who were attempting introductory math at Georgia State were getting non-passing grades. That's a recipe for disaster. There's no way an institution with the demographics of Georgia State, majority low income, can succeed with a required course that most students take their first semester having a 43% non-pass rate, because hundreds of students are then retaking it the next semester, and God knows at the time we were doing nothing to make them more successful with the second attempt. We had hundreds of students dropping out of Georgia State just because they couldn't get through the math requirement. Certainly if anybody came in on a scholarship and racked up 2 Ds and Fs in math, that scholarship was gone. A merit scholarship would be gone. So we've totally changed the way we do math instruction at Georgia State, at least at the introductory level. We no longer do lecture courses. We only do hybrid flipped classes using adaptive technology. So we built out these labs across campus where the students meet as a group. That's important. With their instructors, that's important. But they're each working on at their own pace on terminals using adaptive learning exercises. So the slower students don't get left behind in the first week of classes because they've missed some foundational concept. The adaptive program will give more questions till it detects that the student has built up competencies. The more advanced students don't get bored and tuned out. They get more challenging questions. But I think the biggest difference is every hour that a student is in one of those labs, they're getting about 100 bits of immediate personalized feedback. They're answering a math problem and getting immediate response from the program, as opposed to the old model where we had some lecture classes, probably not too much smaller than this room, and somebody who didn't like math and didn't want to be called on sat in the back room and never got called on all semester. So does this approach make a difference? Again, a big difference. It's not quite where we want it to be yet, but we've lowered the the non-pass rates by 35% with the same material. In fact, we ran RCTs the first semesters. We experimented with these hybrid classes. So students from the lecture sections and the hybrid sections took the same midterm and final. And then we did a data project to see how students did at the next level in chemistry and biology and some of the other courses, accounting, that relied on the math skills. And again, we saw the students were learning at a much better rate. So this change is about 1,300 students a year who are passing math in their first attempt, who just a few years ago were getting D's and F's and having to come back and take it again. And because it's worked so well in introductory math, we now have a scale project going on at Georgia State where we're converting 20,000 seats a year of social science courses in political science, economics, and psychology to adaptive flipped classrooms, entirely initiated by the faculty. The faculty saw how much better the returns were for their math colleagues in teaching introductory math, and they said, you know, we have some of the same issue in macro and microeconomics. Maybe we can get similar returns. And for the sections that aren't going through pedagogical innovation, we have one of the largest near-peer tutoring programs in the country. Our supplemental instruction program uses data first to identify courses with high non-pass rates, then to identify students, especially those who are already on work study, who succeed in those same courses. Now we hire them back, we take them out of answering phones at a front desk, hire them and pay them to go through training, pay them to sit in on the same class they just succeeded in so they get to know the new students and the instructor, and pay them to do structured tutoring sessions 3 times a week. We're tracking all the attendance by card swipe, so as students attend the tutoring, they swipe their cards. And what we've seen is students perform at much better levels, about a half a letter grade better with these kind of peer tutors embedded in the class. The retention rates are up considerably. The graduation rates for the tutors have gone up by about 7 percentage points. And because this works so well and is cost effective, we had over 1,000 course sections this just completed academic year that had a peer or near peer tutor embedded within the class. Finally, you know, we've got students now onboarded to the university. We've got them hopefully picking a major through those tough gateway courses. How do you keep students on track? How do you get them to the point of graduating? One of the big obstacles for our students are finances. You know, as we got better and better at holding on to students for academic reasons, we saw another kind of leak in the dam that we hadn't noticed previously. We began dropping more and more students every semester for their inability to cover their tuition and fees. So by 2011-12, we were dropping over 1,000 students a semester who are fully academically qualified because they couldn't cover the full cost of their tuition and fees. And what we found when we looked at the data was even more disturbing. The biggest subgroup of the students we were dropping every semester were seniors. Seniors. These are the students who have already figured out how to do college. They've gotten through all those other obstacles we've been talking about. They're really good bets for graduating, except for the fact that Georgia State enrolls almost entirely low-income students, and these students were often running out of eligibility. They had complicated lives. 90% of our students have jobs. So if they had to withdraw from courses one semester for work or for family issues and so forth, they were running out of scholarships, they were running out of Pell, they were running out of loan eligibility right before they crossed the finish line. So in 2011, we started a new program, which at the time some people thought was crazy. Students do nothing They don't have to come into any office. They don't have to self-identify. We're trolling the data, looking for students who are good academic risks, especially those who are far along in their studies and have small balances. And right before the drop, right before otherwise we would have dropped them from their classes because they couldn't come up with the money, we instead just put the money in their accounts. We call them up and let them know what we did so they don't make other plans. You know, don't make other plans Monday morning, because we just put the last $1,100, $800, $1,400 in your account. You're good to go for the semester. The first 2 semesters we ran this program, we had multiple students hanging up on us. They thought it was a scam. They couldn't believe anybody from Georgia State had just put $1,400 into their account. But what we found is the program, one, is highly effective. Nationally, the data shows that if you allow a student to stop out involuntarily for even a single semester, they only have about a 30% chance of ever coming back and completing their degree at your campus. We give students on average $900 through this program, and we're getting almost 80% of them to graduate within 2 semesters. What other scholarship program can give you that kind of return? But even better, we've done a data analysis. In fact, the Gates Foundation was interested in this program. They sent Boston Consulting Group in for weeks to look at this program. We opened up all our books. They determined that the program actually runs in the black. It pays for itself. You give the students $900 on average. You immediately get back $900 because this program is covering gaps in tuition and fees to the university, right? So they're just paying it to us. But more than that, what they found is the average bill of somebody who gets a $900 gap is more like $2,600. So they've already put $1,700 out of pocket. Out of loans, out of their work money, whatever. And so you not only get the $900 back again that you just gave them, you hold on to the $1,700 that otherwise would be wiped away if you drop the student for the semester. And it makes a huge, huge difference. Last year alone, 1,300 of the bachelor students who got degrees from Georgia State were recipients of one of these microgrants at some point during their studies. The other big challenge is how you keep students on track academically. And it was a similar problem. You know, I think outsiders don't understand how dropouts and stopouts work. They think that somehow the student signals us in advance that they're getting ready to leave the institution. All of you know that that's not the case. What happens in 99% of the instances is students enrolled one semester and they just don't enroll the next semester. And you think, okay, well maybe the semester after that, and they don't enroll that semester and that, and they've just turned into a dropout. So we wanted to find some way we could identify the early warning signs that a student would be dropping out 6 months, 9 months, 12 months later. So what are the academic behaviors that are precursors to the fact that a student might drop or flunk out of Georgia State? So we ran a big data project beginning back in 2011. We've been updating this data every night since then. We looked at 2.5 million Georgia State grades, 140,000 student records, trying to see if there were identifiable behaviors that correlated to dropout rates. We thought we'd find a couple dozen. We found 800. And what Georgia State has been doing for the last 6 years, it'll be 6 years in August, is tracking every single Georgia State student every night for every one of those 800 risk factors. If one's identified, as we update our student information systems, you know, the students leave a footprint every day. They're signing up for classes, they're getting grades, they're changing majors. If they engage in a behavior that the data show is risky, the next morning, an advisor assigned to that student gets an alert, and within 48 hours, there is an intervention. It sounds fancy and maybe even intimidating. It shouldn't be. What I think this is common sense being delivered for the first time at Georgia State at scale. So we've got all these complex maps. Your campus does too. This is our BS in chemistry of what students are supposed to follow in order to graduate. But we'd never been monitoring it before. And if a student got off path, we never re-engaged them and said, well, since you got a D in that course last semester, now here's what you need to do this semester. Now we're monitoring all the registration records, and if a student signs up for the wrong class, it's not noticed 6 months after they finish the course, where some advisor tells them, oh, back in spring of 18, you should have taken the physics course for STEM majors, not for non-STEM majors. Now you have to go back and do the right class. And the predictive analytics that a lot of people focus on, again, just common sense advice. We found, for instance, in the data, there's a strong correlation between the first grade a student gets in his or her major and their chances of graduating on time. So we've run this data for every major at Georgia State. This is just an example. But if you're a political science student looking in the center of the chart here and get an A or B in your first political science class, you're graduating from Georgia State on time at a 75% clip or above. That's fantastic. That's great for us. You get a C in that first class, you're graduating on time at a 25% clip. But what historically had Georgia State done with that C student? Nothing. Worse than nothing if you're a first-generation student, because we mislead students. We say you got a minimum grade in the prerequisite course of a C, now you're eligible to go on and take upper-level coursework in political science. But which one of us sitting here with a straight face could say to a student, you're ready to take upper-level coursework in political science if you have a 75% chance of failing that course, right? So now, for the first time, we're delivering common sense advice. As soon as that C grade is registered, we don't chastise the student, but we bring the student in and share some of the data. We point out that other students historically at Georgia State who are political science majors and get C in that first class haven't done very well in graduating. So let's talk about it. And the advisor may look at the papers and the exams with the students. Maybe they're writing or reading issues. Maybe it's just that the student is working 40 hours a week. But let's diagnose the problem now when it's correctable rather than 6 months later, 9 months later, when it leads to the student flunking classes, losing scholarships, and dropping out of the university. We call this whole system GPS advising because it's like the GPS in your car, right? It used to be you drive along and make a wrong turn, and you're oblivious to the fact that you made a wrong turn, and it's sometimes almost impossible to find your way back to your destination, right? But now with GPS, as soon as you make that wrong turn, within seconds, you're getting back on track again. That's the same concept here. That instead of allowing students to go way off path, let's note it immediately and see if we can get the student back on route. The trick here is scale. Over the last 12 months, we've had more than 54,000 one-on-one meetings with students at Georgia State that were prompted by alerts coming out of the system. We did not correct 54,000 problems, but I can say just 6 years ago, these were 54,000 issues that were going completely undiagnosed. Students were signing up for the wrong classes, they were underperforming in prerequisites, they were in the wrong majors. Nobody was lifting a finger. We were expecting our mostly first-generation low-income students to have diagnostic powers that we as an institution were unwilling to take responsibility for. And so did this whole initiative make a difference? It made a big difference. So we launched in the summer of 2012. We immediately saw a significant increase in retention rates, with the big gains not for our first-time full-time freshmen, but for our part-time students, our transfer students, our adult learners, our military learners, all the students who tend to sail under the radar screen. Now they're finally getting tracked for 800 risk factors and getting immediate proactive interventions. Since we've launched this platform, we've seen significant drops in average time to degree. So again, we launched in 2012. This is the average number of credit hours that bachelor students at Georgia State have accumulated at the point of getting their degrees. And looks what happened starting in 2012. We've actually cut about half a semester off the average time it takes a bachelor student to get their time to degree, because they're finding their major earlier on, they're not taking 3 attempts to get through their math courses, they're registered for the right classes. If you think that doesn't make a difference to the student, that translates into about $15 million in savings in tuition and fees for this year's graduating class compared to the graduating class before we launched the program. And because we have so much data now, we've run over 250,000 interventions over the last 6 years, we've been able to defy some of the misnomers about the use of data and predictive analytics in advising. When we launched this platform, the one criticism I heard from some of the faculty was along this lines: oh, I see what you're doing. You've created a system for moving students to easier majors. The premise being, if we advise students based on probabilities and analytics, all the students will end up taking the easiest courses in the easiest majors. 250,000 interventions in, our 2 fastest growing majors are computer science and biology. Nobody thinks those are among the easiest majors at Georgia State. And every year since we've had this platform in place, we've set new records for the number of students of color and low-income students actually completing bachelor's degrees in STEM fields. And here you can see the increases, in some cases triple-digit % increases in the red. In blue is the growth in that population over the same time period. So, you know, for our black males, we're up 15% in black males enrolled, but over 100% in black males achieving STEM degrees. And when we looked at the data, it's not because a lot more students are declaring STEM fields. It's because a lot fewer students are declaring STEM fields and then wiping out after 1 or 2 semesters. We used to be perfectly happy to have that black male say, I'm pre-med organic chemistry, and sit back while he struggled in calculus and then failed organic chemistry the next semester, and after 2 semesters he was either out of the university or looking for another major. So we have worked on all these stages in the student life cycle. What have been the aggregate impacts when you put all of these pieces together? Well, one of the impacts that wasn't expected is this kind of sleepy commuter school has begun to get a lot more attention. This was campus last June, when you may recognize the gentleman standing on the far right there. Bill Gates was in town to do a keynote, and he invited himself to campus. And it wasn't to meet the president. In fact, he didn't meet the president. He spent 3 hours with us talking about these student success programs, fascinated by the use of data and technology to help especially low-income, underserved students succeed. He sat there talking to the students. We had picked students out who had engaged in these various programs I've been describing. My favorite story is about the young gentleman on the far right, the redheaded student, Austin. We picked him out because he was one of the students who had used the chatbot over 40 times during the previous summer, which was his incoming freshman year. And as he sits down, we picked him to show Bill Gates how the chatbot works. He sits down and says, I must admit, sir, it's rather humbling to be teaching software to you. We've been invited to the White House. You heard I've had the chance to speak at the White House a couple of times. President Obama has talked about our programs, although I should say over the last 17, 18 months, it's been a lot more quiet. So I don't know what's going on there. But for a while there was a lot of attention for the White House. The other thing that has happened in aggregate is these innovations, these initiatives have basically got us through the recession. That, it's not often in life where doing the right thing is also the prudent thing, but it really is for many of our campuses that struggle to meet enrollment targets. Holding on to the students you enroll can be the most efficient way for you to support your budget. Try this calculus when you get back to your campus. Every 1% we increase our retention rate at the main campus, at the Atlanta campus of Georgia State. That's over 300 additional students we're holding on to. I went to our finance team and said, what was the average bill that a student paid to the university over the past 12 months? Turns out to be about $9,800. So there's the math done for you on the screen. Every 1% we increase our retention rate, that's worth over $3 million in addition to tuition and fee revenues. And we haven't improved our retention rate by 1 point, as you'll see in just a second. But the reason we're doing it is not for Bill Gates' attention or even for the finances, but because it makes a difference for the students. And look at where we've come in such a short period of time. Over the last 6 years, we're graduating 2,800 more students every year, a 67% increase, despite all those demographic shifts that would tell the pundits that our rate should be going down. Even better, look where the gains have come from. Even over the same period, we're up 67% overall, but we're up over 100% for black students, 130% for low-income students, 160% for Latino Hispanic students. Not because any one of these programs is targeted. We haven't done a lot with the Black Male Initiative, this, and the Latino, that, and the Pell, the other thing. What we've done is seen problems that trip up students. We've tried to resolve those problems for all students. So all students are on board in a different way. All students have access to the chatbot. All students get tracked for 800 risk factors every day. And as we've done those things, leveled the playing field, what we've found is the students who benefit the most are the students who are tripped up the most by that insane bureaucracy we had in place beforehand. Those graduation rates we started with a little while ago, those were the blue bars you're looking at right here. It's not that they've improved incrementally, they've improved exponentially. So we've more than doubled our graduation rates over the last decade for our black students. We've almost tripled it for our Latino students. We've more than tripled it for our black male students. And there's no achievement gap. For each of the last 3 years, our black, our Latino, our first generation, and low-income students have all graduated at or above the rate of the student body overall. So for those of you who say, demographics are destiny, the fact that the student comes to you as low income or as an underserved student means that they're going to graduate at lower rates, Georgia State is showing that that's a lie. It's not the case that the students are destined to graduate at lower rates. And an interesting footnote here, this institution in the shadow of the Martin Luther King district that it was segregated into the 1960s, now for each of the last 4 years is conferring more bachelor's degrees to African American students than any other college or university in the United States. Last slide here, I started with the equity issues we face as a nation, that New York Times chart. And I'm a firm believer, as I believe all of you in this room are, that there's no better engine of social mobility than higher education. And Georgia State is walking proof of that. We're overshadowed greatly, and rightfully in many ways, by institutions like Emory and Georgia Tech that are very elite and enroll some of the very best students in the country. But the Brookings Institute this past fall did another sort of ranking where they looked at an institution's worth based on its impact on social mobility. What they specifically looked at is how effective are schools at taking students as they enroll from families in the bottom 20% of Americans' biannual household income. And then 15 years later, those college students, those now college graduates, are in the upper half of Americans' biannual household income. And by that measure, Georgia State is number 1 in Georgia and number 25 in the nation. There is a difference we can make. The challenges you face on your campus may seem very different, but the problems your students face are probably a lot like the ones that Georgia State students face. And what I think the message of Georgia State is the work we're doing in this room and in other rooms like it across the country is vitally important. It's not wasted time. You talk about the difference between 2,800 more students, mostly low income, mostly students of color, having college degrees rather than being dropouts with debt. And that's transformative. That's transformative for the lives of the individuals impacted. It's transformative for the city of Atlanta. It's transformative for our state and our communities. And that's the power all of you have in your hands. So thank you so much for your attention, but thank you even more for all the great work that you do. And I would be happy to answer some questions. We have a few minutes for that. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a great question. Yeah, I will say first observation is a lot of the gains we've made didn't directly require the faculty to make foundational changes, right? The fact that we register students in groups of 25, some of the faculty don't even notice the difference. They're still teaching the same classes, the same size. The fact that the students are registered in a different pattern may not be aware to them. But it was a very divisive issue back 9, 10 years ago when these debates were occurring in the math department. There were some math faculty who, I remember these discussions, said, we'll improve the DFW rates in our math classes when K through 12 in Georgia gets serious about math education, right? So their view was, it's them, not us. And so what we did, there's no way you can force faculty to teach a pedagogy that they don't embrace. So what we did is enable those faculty who were most interested in trying something experimental to do so. So centrally, again, we did not force any faculty to change, but those faculty who wanted to try a hybrid adaptive model, we helped build up out some classrooms, and then we helped put in place these data experiments, like I described, of the students coming together and taking a common midterm and final for those first couple years, no matter whether they were in the lecture version or the adaptive version. And what we did, and we've done this again and again at Georgia State to get faculty buy-in, lead with the data. The faculty are really smart people. And more than that, they have a lot of experience under the belt, right? They think they know what works and what doesn't because many of them have been in the classroom and working with students for years and years. But they're also all trained to respect the evidence. I mean, if you graduated from a doctoral program, a PhD program, and so forth, the importance of evidence is stressed. So if you lead with the evidence and go to math faculty and show not marginally better results with the adaptive sections, but 35% better pass rates, and then better a success rate at the next level courses as well, and then ultimately higher STEM completion rates and so forth, that can be pretty convincing. And so it was the faculty in math that ultimately decided upon the data from the first 2 years to convert all of the sections that they offer of introductory math to the adaptive approach. And now they're out on the road talking about this as an innovation that they own. Yes? The mic is coming to you.
Hello, thank you. Great presentation, and thank you for sharing your data information. It can be very powerful. On your campus, are you having any conversations around student privacy around the data and the ownership of data and consent of their data being used? Because I know in the data analytics world right now, that's the big conversation happening worldwide. Yeah,
very much so. I'll say this, this may be an ad hoc point, but my academic field is religious studies and my concentration is religious ethics. So we have tried to hardwire that into our approach from the beginning. The first thing I'd say, which surprises certainly a lot of the journalists I talk to, is there's no data that we're collecting now that we weren't collecting before we started the use of predictive analytics. So sometimes I'm asked, aren't you afraid that somebody's going to break into, hack into the system and get all this data? And I say it's exactly the same data we've been collecting for the previous 30 years. Student grades, student registration records, their majors, their minors, and so forth. What I think is we're finally using this data that we've always collected to the benefit of the students. It was always sitting there that if you get a C in your first political science class, you have a bad chance of succeeding at the next level. The only problem is we never shared that with students before, and now we're sharing it with students. Secondly, we've made a commitment to not keep any of the data from the students. So one of the things we did as we launched this initiative 6 years ago is bought a second monitor for every advisor on campus. So anything the advisor is looking at when they're looking at data about the student has equal right to see. And we think that's actually very powerful. We found that, for instance, it used to be very hard if a student wanted to be a nursing student to convince that student this isn't going to work out. You've got lots of D's and F's in required courses. You're not going to be able to complete that major. But now that we share the historical data, those conversations have gotten a lot less subjective and quite a bit more effective. The third thing to say is we allow any student to opt out who wants to. So if you really don't want to be tracked for 800 risk factors, we don't have to track you for 800 risk factors. We're still going to collect all the same data because, as I say, the data at the heart of the risk factors are your grades, your registration records, your major, your minor, all the things that get transcripted is what we're collecting. But we don't have to track you for the 800 risk factors. We are, as I said, 250,000 interventions in, 6 years in. We've had 2 students who have come forward and said they didn't want to be tracked by this data. So, my question to those who raise the privacy concerns is to say, kind of raise responsibility concerns. How can we be living up to our responsibility as institutions that are taking tens of thousands of dollars from students, many of whom are first-generation low-income students, unless we deliver to them the kind of timely and informative advice they need to make wise decisions? And this whole idea that we're protecting students by allowing them to make mistake after mistake after mistake, which in many cases leads to them dropping out with debt and nothing to show for it, is, it's not an argument I buy into. So I do think that we have to protect privacy, but we are not collecting personal data on students. We're not tracking for when you check into your dorm rooms and how often you went to the library and all those sorts of things. We're just using the academic data we've been collecting at Georgia State for 30 or 40 years.
You talked a lot about the interventions that worked. Can you share a few examples of things that you tried that did not succeed, and then how that informed future iterations of your intervention?
Great question. We've had lots of failures, but if you do a good job of setting up assessment data as you launch programs, not only does it help with the issue we were talking about a moment ago, convincing faculty, right? Because then you have the data sets that are going to be compelling, but it also sets you up to make changes, tweaks, adjustments that may make the programs more successful. So one example related to an initiative I talked about this afternoon, when we first launched the adaptive learning math, given that 90% of our students work, we thought there could be another benefit, which is that students could be doing the adaptive learning components all over the city of Atlanta, like from their homes, from their work, and so forth. They could be signing on, and they could be doing those programs in that context. We did not have success with that model. We had much better success when we got the students still together physically in a room with their instructors as a class, so they saw the same faces, they could hear what other students were saying, and so forth. So, there are these instances where you try something and the results are not immediately there, but then you try something new based on the data you've collected, and you can find, ways to improve them. So there aren't too many instances of things that we've absolutely scrapped, because in each instance there's an iteration or maybe 2 or 3 beyond it that can make it more impactful. Any last question? Got one more. We're about out of time, but there's one over on the far left here.
Thank you. Sorry to make you walk. I'm curious, in my previous job at a four-year university, the chancellor would talk a lot about getting to younger students and making them aware that higher education should be an option as they get older. Have you worked with maybe local high schools in Atlanta or national high school organizations about maybe collecting data earlier, maybe to give you a better snapshot of what you're going to see as the students get older?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a number of initiatives that have us working in high schools. We're a big partner in Achieve Atlanta, which works with all the Atlanta public schools. We've got a big project in DeKalb County, which is one of the least well-resourced sections of Metro Atlanta. You know, it's hard to bundle into one package the big lessons there, but I will say one of the least expensive but most impactful things we do, which directly parallels a number of the programs we're doing for our currently enrolled students, is expose students to other near peers who have figured out how to do college. One thing we started doing about 7-8 years ago is writing into all institutional scholarships a payback. So our students do work as part of their institutional scholarships, and what we require now is that they work in effect for the student success offices. And one of the programs we found most effective, since a lot of our students do yield from the Metro Atlanta area, is have those students work. You know, once a week they go and spend several hours in their middle and high schools. They already have an entree there, teachers and others know them, but they have profound impact upon students and the next generation of students coming forward. Cobb County, which is northwest of downtown Atlanta, has one of the fastest growing Latino Hispanic populations in Georgia. And so what we did with the scholarship program geared to some of our Latino students is have them go and spend time. You know, we do some training, but it's not even particularly highly monitored. It's just exposing the current high school students to these college students who are succeeding at the college level. And over a 3-year period, and we documented this, we had over a 20% increase in the matriculation rates of Latino students from those high schools. And it cost almost nothing. So yeah, we need to get into that space again, especially those of you who are facing demographic challenges for that next wave and next generation of students. We need to be much better at making sure those students have every chance of enrolling post-secondary. And it's not just for the purposes of our budgets and our enrollments. It's also, I believe, for the benefit of those students. In Metro Atlanta, the Atlanta Metro Chamber of Commerce estimates that 80% of the continuing permanent jobs that will be created in Atlanta over the next 10 years will require a minimum of a bachelor's degree. So, you know, each one of those students, we say, yeah, it's fine if you just, you know, are content with a high school diploma and so forth. We're really, cutting off a lot of options for those students. So I think it's, you know, again, the work we're doing in this room and others like it is vitally important. Again, thank you so much for your attention, and thank you for the work you do.